Hello, Alejandro.
Hello, teacher. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. So we also have scheduled this session with Leonardo. Let's give him just a minute to see if he joins us. All right?
All right, teacher.
Great. Okay. In the meantime, I'm gonna share my screen. Can you please tell me if you see my screen?
Yes, teacher.
All right. All right. So let's start. So today's topic will be about how to compare things. This is an advanced topic, so Uh, well, you might already know how to compare things. Like, for example, we have words like more than, fewer than, better, less. But we're not gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about um, how can we compare things by degree. So let me show you that. So when we compare things, we can talk about differences by character. That is, we can talk about a big difference, a small difference, or no difference at all. When we don't talk about differences, we're also comparing things, even though that is a similarity. So, Alejandro, I would like to ask you this: what is a comparison, and what phrases do you use to compare things?
Uh, I think we comparison when there are big difference or some difference when between things. For example, mm, what for us I we have different friends for us
Mm-hmm.
for use compared. For example, it's similarly,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Similarly,
it's it's better, uh,
similar,
and
better.
better. Um,
What else
I
do you
think
use?
well, we can use the verb with for example, smart, smartest.
Ah, you mean ER? Like smarter,
Yeah,
slimmer. Ah, okay, very good. All right, we have enough with that. So slimmer. That's very good. So yes, comparison is just a signaling we do when we're comparing two things. Let's say we have taller thing and a smaller thing. So we need to make visible and comprehensible those differences between one and two. And sometimes uh, we might have a third object. So let's start. About generalities and comparisons, we can use comparative adjectives to compare different things. For example, that was the one you told me that ends in er. Smarter, smaller, taller. So let's look at this example. Max is taller than Judy. Notice how we use than. Many Americans confuse this. They sometimes write then because it sounds the same, but we need to use then as with an A. Now, you're more patient than I am. His first book is less interesting than his second. All right. So in those examples, we're using adjectives. like it's beautiful, and well, in this case was taller, patient. In this case was interesting right here. So we can use adjectives, all right? Now we can use this form is as with an adjective to say that two things are the same, or not to as to say that one thing is less than another. For example, her hair is as long as mine. Or in this one, it is not as sunny as yesterday. So we're comparing, and we're kind of talking about as much as. That is the same as saying as. We can add an adjective. So as bigger as beautiful as. Anyway. Alright. So we can also use expressions like different from, similar to, and the same as. Let's look at these examples. So England is different from the United Kingdom. Notice how we're using the word different. This one is quite simple. We can use different or similar. Now let's look at this one. His car is similar to mine. Now let's look at this one. The results from the first test are the same as the results from the second. So in this one, the third one, we're using as. Wait, the same as the result from the second. Oh no, here we're not using as. We're just using the same.
The same.
Yeah, I thought because in some instances we can say the same as, and when we're comparing a third thing, we can use another as. So those were the generalities. Now let's talk about the degree or the character. Now remember, we talk about degree when we are scaling the differences, like small or big or 0. So let's talk about showing big differences. We can use much, so much, and a lot, even or far with comparative adjectives. Now let's look at this example. Sales in July were a lot higher than sales in June. So we're saying a lot higher. Notice how we have this er adjective that's already expressing a differences, but if we want to express a bigger difference, we use a lot. Now let's look at this one. He was far less experienced than the other applicant. So in this case we use far less. And again, we're talking about the adjective of experience. So in this case, he was not as experienced as the other applicant, but this far less makes it bigger. It's a really big difference. Alright. We can use nowhere near as. So for example, the interview was nowhere near as difficult as the written exam. Again, we're talking about a big difference. So in this case, the written exam was more difficult. Actually, way more difficult. Let's write it. Okay, so we can use very, really, completely, totally, with different from. So let's look at this example. They may be twins, but they're completely different from each other. So we're using here completely different to show a big difference. That was the big differences. Now let's talk about how can we show that there's a small difference. So we can use slightly a little, a bit, a little bit, or not much with comparative adjectives. So that will be for this example. The number of registrations has been slightly lower than expected. In the second one, we have houses in my city are not much more expensive than flats. So here we have not much more. This not is kind of important because we're comparing a small difference. So we use not. Okay, again, houses in my city are not much more expensive than flats. So maybe we can be talking about the difference of $1,000 or $500. It's not really a big difference. Now we can use almost, nearly, not quite, roughly, more, or less, or about with as, or as, and the same as. So let's look at this example. She's almost as old as I am. Now this one. The figures for May are more or less the same as the figures for June. We can also say that this is a relative difference because they're so small that, let me write, they're so small that they often get confused. So in this example, we can be talking about maybe you have 20 years old and the other person has 21 years old. And this one, the figures for May are more or less the same as the figures for June. So May and June, here, May and June had almost the same figures. That is, maybe it's sales or income. All right. We can use very or really with similar to. So that will mean, and let's look at this example. My son looks really similar to my father when he was that age. Notice how it's different from the previous one, because let me go back. Okay. Here we use negatives, and here we use positives. So we can show a small difference talking negatively, or in this case we can be using a positive phrase to talk about how similar is something to another thing. Alright, so this is the final one, and is when we have zero differences. Let's see about that. So we can use exactly the same as, or just as to emphasize that there is no difference. So the first example, my grandma's cakes still taste exactly the same as when I was a child. Now let's look at the second one. A new phone can be just as expensive as a new computer these days. This one is longer. Just as expensive as a new computer. Okay, it was actually until here. I got that wrong. 1 second. As expensive as a. Okay. So yeah, we can use just as expensive as a new computer these days to show that there's no difference. When we have these kind of phrases, let's look at this one. For example, we have a phone that costs $1,000, and we have also a computer that well, it also costs 1,000. So here we have the phone and the computer. we're saying just as expensive as to show that this costs exactly the same. There's no difference at all. So I also have small practice. But before we go deep into that, I would like to ask you if you have questions about this. All right. So if in the case you have questions about that, we can go back. I have the exercise. As we're doing the exercise, the questions might come up, so don't worry about that. Now let's start with the first exercise. I feel better than yesterday. Which one do you think should we use? Really, so much, or completely?
I feel really better than yesterday, I think.
Alright, so in this case, it's so much better
So much.
because really it's used for non-countable nouns. In this case, we're talking about better. So better is, how can I say this? You cannot be better if you understand me. So if we would say really better, we will say like more than better, and that is not possible. So we say so much better because in a previous state we were not in such a good position. So okay, in that one we use so much better. Oh, and is what do you think about this? Is this a big, small difference or no difference at all?
It's a small difference.
Okay, again, if we say I feel so much better than yesterday, do you think?
Bigger.
Okay,
Big difference.
big difference. Very good. We're gonna get that difference as we're doing the exercises, so don't worry about that. And this one, it was more expensive than I expected. So, which one can we use? A little, exactly, or roughly? Look how we're using more.
I think the first one.
Okay, a little. So it was a little more expensive than I expected. Do you think that's right?
It was a little more. A small difference.
Okay, very well. So yes, we can use a little. That is the answer. And as you said, this is a small difference because let's imagine maybe in pesos it was a difference of 1,000 pesos. So we say it was a little more expensive than I expected. Very well. Let's look at this one. His way of thinking is similar to mine. So look at similar. Maybe we're talking a big difference, small difference, or zero difference. Now, after getting that clue, you already know which word can we use. So it can be either much, even, really.
I think that much similar to mine.
Okay, well, in this case, we use really similar.
Really similar.
That was a good attempt. So, if we say his way of thinking is really similar to mine, are we talking about big, small, or zero difference?
Is A small difference.
Very well. Small difference. Now, you notice how this is kind of difficult to think because we're using really similar. This means something kind of big, right? But in the context of his way of thinking is similar to mine, then this big meaning transforms into a small difference. So you're getting that very well. Okay, now let's look at this one. The documentary is as interesting as you might think. So we're using as and as. Now, can we use very, a lot, or nowhere near?
The document is I think now here near.
Perfect, very well. Nowhere near. So, okay. I just
Nowhere near. Yes.
nowhere near. Okay, and do you think that's a big difference, small difference, or zero difference?
A small difference is what do you say the last one option?
So this phrase will be: the documentary is nowhere near as interesting as you might think.
Yes, but the option is big difference, small difference,
Or zero difference.
zero difference.
Okay, well, yes, it's extreme. So we can be either zero or a really big difference. In this phrase, we're talking about these two. Because, well, we might be thinking you had the expectation that the documentary was really, really interesting. But at the end, it was actually not how you think. So in that case, we say a big difference because it was completely different from what you thought. But it can also be a zero difference because of the expectation. Maybe you were thinking already that it was a very bad documentary, and you expected that it was a bad documentary, so it ended up like that. So in this case, it's both. It depends on the context. All right.
Okay.
Now let's look at this one. Jack's answers are the same as Mia's on his test.
Exactly.
Very well. Exactly the same. We use exactly because with this kind of words, I forget the specific word for this kind of nouns, but degree, countable. Okay, if I remember, later I'm gonna tell you. But yeah, it's this one. It's exactly the same. Very well. Now, is this a zero difference or a big difference?
Zero difference.
Very well. Okay, now let's look at this one. We're less prepared than we should be. Which one can we use here?
Not quite less.
We're not quite less prepared than we should be. Okay, well, in this case, we're talking about the less adjective, so we should use a bit.
A bit.
Mm-hmm.
We are.
That would be we're a bit less prepared than we should be. You see how that makes more sense? So if we use a bit less prepared, are we talking a small difference?
Yes, small difference.
Small difference. Very well. Okay, so cats are different from dogs. Which one can we say here?
So much difference.
Mm-hmm. So very well, we can use so much, and we can also say very different. So very well. In the case we use so much, do you think that will be a big difference or a small difference?
A big difference.
Big difference. Very well. And the last one. So the coffee cafe is cheap, but as good as Coffee Central.
But not much
So you say
as
it's not
good
much.
as coffee center.
Okay, in this case, it's actually not quite.
Not quite.
Not quite as good as Coffee Central. In the case we use not quite, do you think that's a small difference or a zero difference?
A big difference.
Big
And
difference?
a similar difference.
Similar difference. Why is that?
Yeah,
What do you think?
because use as good as.
Okay, so in that case, is it small or zero?
Is, the coffee the coffee cup is cheap, but it's probably small because the center use but.
Yeah, it's actually small. So very well. I just remember um, when we have words like better, the same right here, these are absolute nouns. So when we have absolutes, let's imagine a scale from 1 to 10. We have 1 to 10. And we have other numbers here. When we have, for example, the same or better, we don't have like one better, two better type of degree. So we call those absolutes because we're outside of a scale. That is the degree. Is that clear? About the absolute nouns?
10 to 10.
Okay, so yeah, well, we use absolute nouns with words like exactly or completely because we cannot put a degree on that. So we can also say that this is the highest degree possible. That is a very good clue. Highest degree possible. All right. Well, now let's try to make a summary out of this. So, what can we say about small difference? Or if you want, you can give me an example.
Small difference.
We can go back
Mm,
if you want. So, we have various ways to say small differences. Wait, that's here. Big differences, showing small differences. So, for example, the number of registration has been slightly lower than expected. So we can say slightly, a little, a bit, a little bit. That's how we use small differences. So, having those words in mind, try to give me an example.
Yeah. Whatever example. the the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Coronavirus.
similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar in Bogota
Mm-hmm.
than than España.
In Bogota, then okay, that would not make sense if we say then. That's if we will use a er adjective. So
Okay. The coronavirus is similar. The coronavirus is similar in Bogota
and
uh, and mm, and España,
Spain.
Spain.
Okay, very well. That was a good example. Now, yeah, this is a small difference, but we can make it better if we say slightly, for example. Slightly. So we can say the coronavirus is slightly similar in Bogota and Spain. That's how
Okay.
we use those adjectives. Now let's make an example about a big difference. So let me show you what words can we use. Showing big differences. So we can use so much, we can use a lot, or even or far. In order to keep this simple, try to give me an example with so much or a lot. So try to keep that in mind.
For example, the food in Colombia
Mm-hmm. Colombia.
is really different.
Okay, well, you're gonna use different as an adjective.
Yeah.
Different.
Is
So in that case, which one you said? So much different or very different?
okay. The food in Colombia. So much.
Okay, well, we cannot say so much in this case. We can
No.
say
The
a
food
lot
in
of
Colombia.
is very
Al,
different, or we can say it's way more different. Which one would you like to use?
is much different.
Yeah, we can also use that one. It's much different.
It's much different. The food in Colombia is much different.
We can say compare to
Compare compared to other side.
let's say other cities.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that works. The food in Colombia is much different compared to other cities. That is a big difference. So you're complying with the request. Now let's try to make a zero example. So for that, remember we have exactly the same or just as to emphasize that there is no difference. Look at these examples. My grandma cake still tastes exactly the same as when I was a child. And a new phone can be just as expensive as a new computer these days. So try to think of an example and we're gonna do it.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I think
Let's try to use the adjective cheap for this
the
example.
can be uh, the beautiful woman.
Okay, the beautiful woman.
The beautiful woman. The beautiful woman. Sidley, just us, or where is the what is
I
the word? Can I use the beautiful woman?
Well, I
Mm,
suggest that you can use cheap to show that there is no difference between two things. So in this case, you're comparing the beautiful woman, and you need to compare it with another thing to make
yeah,
a zero difference.
or the beautiful woman, uh, as used as, or the beautiful woman in Korea.
Okay, so let me delete that. Oh, sorry.
Don't worry. The beautiful woman.
So we are making here 0.
Mhm.
The beautiful woman in
In
Korea,
Korea, as used
as used like this.
uh, as just
Ah, okay.
as just as.
As just as
Just as in my country.
in my country. Okay, that is a very good example because we're showing that there's zero difference between the women from Korea and the women from Colombia. But here we forgot the verb. So the beautiful woman is as just as beautiful as in Korea as in my country. So that let me write it for you in order to make it more grammatical sensible. So the beautiful woman we need a verb is as beautiful, and here we start with the comparison, as beautiful as Colombia, Colombia, as it is in Korea. It was very complex if you see, because
Yeah.
we are using as we are using. This was one of those examples where we used three s's. So, but you did very well, Alejandro. So that was the lesson for today. I wonder if you're having any questions about this. No questions? Okay, somebody wrote. Do you hear me? Okay, I think we just lost the connection, but that's alright. So this was the end of our lesson. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a nice day. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, Alejandro.